we go.
Welcome to week 3 of our Lent group. In week 1, we introduced the course, and last week in week 2, we began to think about our faith journeys and to describe them. This week, week 3, is called Talking Pictures, and we're going to think about our own faith journey and create an image that helps us talk about it, our own faith picture. A faith picture creates an image that sticks in the mind. It's an image that's easy to remember, and it can help us to tell other people what our faith means in an honest way. Sharing our faith picture can be a powerful way to communicate our own relationship with God. So why use picture language? Well, for a start off, Jesus used picture language. In fact, he was a master at using picture language to talk about the big questions of life. Remember, for example, the lost sheep, the lost coin, the mustard seed, the farmer sowing seeds in different types of ground, the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. And some that probably made folks laugh, like a camel trying to get through the eye of a needle, or a man with a plank in his eye. He used everyday picture language that people were familiar with and that people could imagine in their mind's eye. I wonder why those parables were so powerful to the listeners. Are you a visualizer? I know I am. When I hear a story or read a book, I often have very strong mental images of the scene. It can be a bit of a pain because when a film comes out based on a book that I've read, often it's never quite like I've pictured it. But nevertheless, images held in my head help bring the stories to life. I recall hearing the story of Jairus' daughter when I was in Sunday school. And the teacher told us that Jairus was an important man and probably lived in the biggest house in the town. In my mind's eye, Jairus lived in Leigh Town Hall because that was the biggest and grandest building that I could think of in my town. And I used to imagine Jesus walking down Lord Street, and just when he got up to Fairclough shoe shop, where my mum used to take us for our shoes, he would stop because a woman had touched the hem of his robe. Makes me smile remembering it, but it shows just how picture language invites our imaginations and invites us to participate in God's story. I'm sure that somewhere in your mind's eye, there might be some images of the Good Samaritan or the prodigal son. But what about our faith pictures? What kind of pictures are these? Well, at this point, the Church Army resource that we've been using for our Lent group would have us watch a video. But unfortunately, we've had tech problems trying to show these. So I'll describe its contents briefly. 16 people, including the Archbishop of Canterbury, were asked to choose an image, a symbol, a faith picture, call it what you will, to describe their faith, their relationship with God. And these are the things that they chose. Now, Kevin, I wonder if you could share the little PowerPoint with us. So here are the 16 faith pictures that people chose. A stonemaker, a roller coaster, a tapestry, abseiling, a battered old Land Rover, a brown banana, a Duracell Bonnet, a steep, winding road, an assault course, a fire, the AA, a hand, a comfy shoe, a water bottle, glue, a man with hiccups. They then explained how these symbolise their faith. Now, I'm not going to go through all 16. I've simply pulled out 3 examples. So if we go on to the next, lovely. The first one, abseiling. The person who chose this faith picture said this: I'm terrified of height, and there's a moment when you're on the rock and you lean back and you put your whole trust in that rope. There's an element of risk and fear. It's dangerous, but you're completely secure with this rope. And as you mark your way down the rock and you bounce off, sometimes your feet slip. And again, you're completely held firmly by this rope. This picture means a lot to me, as sometimes I feel in this life that I slip, I fall, and I'm scared. But at all times, I know I'm being held completely securely and completely safely. And as long as I can hold on to that rope, as I hold on to Jesus, all's fine. That was the first faith picture. The second one was fire. This is what the person said. My faith picture is a picture of a fire burning brightly and intensely at the bottom. And I suppose that would represent the times when I know God's presence has been really close in my life. And then as the flames rise and they sort of flicker, and all that you have are the sparks that disappear into the night sky, it reminds me that even when the going is tough and life seems difficult, it reminds me that God is always with me, even if I'm not aware of his presence. That was the second one. Now, the third one I pulled out was the Duracell Bonnet, and this came from the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. He said, there are a million different images that come to mind, but the one I'll mention this morning is the Duracell Bonnet in the advert, the one that keeps on going when everything stops. It's not because that's me, it's because the advert is for the power within. And for me, it's the presence of Jesus and the power of his Spirit that enables me to keep going in good times and bad. Looking back over my life, in the grimmest moments and in the happiest moments, that power comes as a gift from God. Now, perhaps one of those may resonate with your experience. Perhaps not. So now I'm going to ask our clergy team to think about their faith picture, and I also pondered my own. So here's my faith picture. It's the mountains and the plains. Now, I love walking in the hills of Cumbria. And sometimes from the top, you get such a clarity of vision. It's amazing. It reminds me of the disciples at the Transfiguration. They ascend a mountain with Jesus and they witness this glorious moment of transfiguration. It's visionary and everything seems clear and they're full of awe and wonder. And then immediately after, they descend to the plains and they're immediately plunged into struggle and difficulty. For me, that says much about life and faith. There are those moments of glorious revelation, and then there are the plains where we live much of our life. In that spiritual journal that I showed you last week, I wrote down this quote that was talking about the Transfiguration, and about mountains and plains. This is it. That is how faith is. It doesn't ascend from one great revelation to the next. It moves through life's ups and downs. So why is the radio there? Well, it kind of related to my faith picture. The former priest of mine used the symbol of a radio to describe our awareness of God's presence. Sometimes we move the tuning dial and the station is as clear as a bell. And then other times there's a lot of hissing and buzzing and white noise. And for some reason, usually our own, we're not quite tuned in. Some moments when we're really clear about God's presence and God's desires, and other times when there's a lot of noise. So that was mine. Let's move on to Judith. Now, can I invite you, Judith, to share a little bit about your faith picture?
Yes, Karen. My faith picture is a landscape by the artist Tina Holly. She's an award-winning artist and is known for her atmospheric paintings of landscapes, trees and water. And she also does intensely detailed architectural studies, all of which I'm very interested in. Those of you who have visited my vicarage at Malham Close probably will be aware of a picture that was over my fireplace, which is a very similar picture to this. It's slightly more involved, but is by the same artist. When I was ordained, Terry, my husband, asked me what would I like for my ordination present, and I said I'd like a picture, please, but I don't know what of yet. And then one day we were visiting the National Trust property at Bodmin Gardens, and we went into the gallery, and I stopped and stared at this one particular picture, which is now hanging in my lounge, because it meant absolutely everything to me on my spiritual journey. The picture you see in front of you now is a smaller version of that picture, and this one is a print, whereas the one hanging up in my lounge is the original. If I take you back to last week when I talked about how influential the moon had been in my journey and how it had shone and lit everything up, the frost made everything look as though it was made with diamonds, all sparkling. When I saw this picture, it took me right back to the room in Cuddeston College where I had this experience. And every time I look at it, to me, it represents God being at the center, Jesus being at the center of everything, shining its light. Some nights it's like it is in the picture. Some nights it's only like a fingernail in the sky, lying on its back. But as soon as I see pictures of the moon, it takes me right back to the beginning of my spiritual journey with God on the road to ordination. That's where it comes from. It glitters, it's small, sometimes it's huge, sometimes we have a supermoon, sometimes it's pink. However I look at it, it stops me in my tracks. And that is the simple answer to my faith picture. I absolutely love it. And the big one hangs on my wall, as I said, in my lounge today. And this smaller picture that I take round with me very often. If I go away, I put it in my suitcase and take it out because of the memories that it holds for me, the very powerful memories that it holds for me. This appears sometimes, and some nights you can't see it, just like faith does. We all have our doubting moments and our doubting times. But then it shows itself like it does in the picture. A beautiful, serene scene, dappled in the water beneath it. And when I look at it, even as I'm looking at it now, I can't take my eyes off it. So that is my faith picture.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you. So if we go on to the next page, Janet, could I invite you to share a little bit about your faith picture?
Of course, as you can see, it's a couple of wedding rings, obviously a man's and a woman's, but it's my faith picture that this describes the most intimate personal relationship I have ever known. It describes how I see God and myself as joined together, just like old married couples. You know, they finish the same the sentences for each other. You can't see the join sometimes. One merges into the other, and this is my faith. This is how I see my faith with God. When I say it's deeply, deeply personal, if you remember last week, I finally accepted my faith after I'd left my husband and come to Leigh. And here I found, it sounds really strange, here I found the new husband, the husband I'd always been wanting, the one who looks after me, the one who gives me strength, the one to whom I can turn to and discuss what's going wrong, the one I know is there constantly. And that's God for me. God isn't just a bit of my life. He's the other half of my life. He is the one who loves me unconditionally. He is the one that sees my faults, but loves me despite those faults. I just I'm finding it quite emotional describing this. You said that you must speak in truth about your faith when you relate it to others, and I have found in God what I've never found before, and I consider myself his and he is mine. And this doesn't just last until death us do part. The beauty of it is it lasts beyond that barrier, beyond death into eternity. It is the symbol of who I am. I belong to Christ, and it's a symbol of who God is in my life. He holds my heart. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, Janet. Kevin, can I invite you to tell us a little bit about your faith picture?
Yes. This may seem somewhat trivial, but it's a perfect symbol, really. It's a glue stick. Now, glue sticks are very useful. I've got one at my my very side right here now. There we go. And they come in handy, of course. But a symbol like this symbolizes my faith in a way which is actually quite demanding, I suppose, of me, because it's the recognition, I think, that God sticks with me. Even though that as a human being, I mess up and I let people down, I let God down, and yet God sticks with me. God doesn't let me go, doesn't cut me loose and say, listen, you're on your own, sonny, go do your own thing now. Sometimes I wish that God wouldn't stick so closely to me, especially at times when I'd rather do things my way, but knowing, of course, that actually you have to do it God's way in the end, and that's the bottom line of it, really. So, with that in mind, I find the glue image useful. I find it a little perplexing and even a little irritating, but most of the time, it works for me because I am very thankful that God doesn't cut me loose, because I know that left in my own devices, just like all of us, I would go a long way away from where I should be. And that's not good for me. It's not good for those around me. So God does stick to me, and I stick to God. And that way, God somehow prevents me from falling apart. Just as, we glue things together, bits of paper onto card or whatever it might be, or photographs, doing a scrapbook or whatever it might be. We do that because we want to create some sense of, I suppose, order and meaning to the things that we have. In the same way is that glue that God provides, that stickability, helps to provide some sense of order and meaning and purpose for my life as well. And so that is why, for me, that symbol of glue is so helpful, very personal, but also one that reminds me that I am, in the end, totally and utterly dependent upon God's grace to get through the day, each day.
Thank you, Kevin. So maybe you're beginning to see how a faith picture can be a start in helping us to talk about our faith. It won't tell the whole story, but it's simply a starting point. And so far, we've talked about the faith pictures of abseiling, a fire, a Duracell Bonnet, the mountains and the plains, the radio, moonlight, wedding rings, and a glue stick. Maybe one of those resonates with your experience. Maybe it doesn't. But perhaps as we move into the discussion section, when we go on to Zoom, you can think about what sort of picture might help you describe your faith. But we'll come to that in the discussion section, in the Zoom section. Now, I think we've still got a few minutes. I haven't been keeping a track of time, but I think we've still got a few minutes. So we'll finish with a question or a couple of questions. So Kevin, Judith and Janet, can I run this question past you? Why is it important to be honest when talking about our faith? Why is it important to be honest when talking about our faith? Does anyone want to jump in with that one?
Yeah, I'll do that one. I think it's really important that when people, for example, get to write their books about their faith journey and stuff like that, that they don't turn them into kind of like the fifth gospel, but rather recognizing that it's okay to talk warts and all, and of how lives have been completely transformed by God's grace. There are so many people who, I'm sure that between us that we could name, who may have in material terms have had absolutely everything, and yet aspects of their life were simply not good. Perhaps they were struggling with things like alcoholism or drug dependency, or perhaps relationships were falling apart, or whatever it might be, and that things were out of control for them. And so their faith journey, and they're talking about it, and perhaps in some ways they're hitting rock bottom, as somebody would have done. Then we then have some kind of sense of assurance, that actually people are in some ways just like us, that people may be particularly talented or whatever it might be, and yet life can still be tough for them, and that they are as much in need of God's grace as the rest of us. And I find that really reassuring when I read those stories and actually think to myself, yeah, that does actually make sense to me. This is somebody I can relate to. Or I may not have had alcohol or drug issues, but I can understand what it is to sort of to feel adrift and and that sort of absence of God's presence, and of realizing that you need to get that back somehow, or just need to find it in the first place. So I think that my honesty in talking about things for me is important, because what it does, it gives authenticity then to the message that I'm trying to talk about, rather than saying, oh yeah, everything is absolutely wonderful, and God sent me down on a rainbow from heaven and planted me in my mother's arms, and it's all been sweetness and light ever since. Well, real life ain't like that. So let's be real.
Yeah, I agree with that one. I mean, my colleagues know that I have struggled with mental health problems for many, many, many years. And in all that time, yes, my faith has been important to me, but there were times I felt extremely lost, and it wasn't easy. It's never easy. Christ didn't say, pick up your cross and follow me, because as Kevin says, it's going to be full of rainbows. It can be hard. It's life. We live a real life, and real life problems hit us just like everyone else. And we've all gone through what was so poetically called the dark night of the soul, when you feel so far away from God, you feel so adrift in the darkness, you're never going to get back. But as Kevin described with his picture, God sticks to us. And as Karen says, he'll abandon everyone else and come and look for you. You just got to hold on. It isn't all rainbows and loveliness and wonderful. We face the same problems day by day as anyone else. You've just got to hope and have faith in your picture of God that he will stick by you.
Thank you, Janet. Judith.
I think it's important to be honest about your faith, because sometimes people can think they've got a faith but don't want to talk about it in case they've got it wrong, or they sound how can I put it? They sound as if it could be trivial, and they're frightened of what people think when they say something about their faith. And I think it's so good if you can relate to everyday pictures that remind you of your faith. I think it's really important how we see God, and how God never leaves us. He never, ever. I feel this with my own faith journey. That night in Oxford, it was as though, this is your last chance, Judith. Will you just get off your bottom and do something about it? He never, ever gives up. And he's always there, even if he's clouded in mist, whether he's, there in the sky and you can see him at full strength. And he can be all sorts of things to all sorts of people. And it's important for people to realise, I think, that you can see God in the everyday things. There's a really good book, and I've got it on my bookshelf somewhere, and I'll try and bring it for our Zoom session tonight. And it's all about finding God in everyday things. And some, when I've read, you can relate to, some you can't. But then we're all different, aren't we? This is why my picture's a picture of the moon, and Kevin's is a glue stick, and yours is the radio. We see God in totally different ways. I used to say to the children when I used to go in, and they used to say, what does God look like, and if I said to them all, draw a picture of God, they'd all practically draw the same picture, the man with the beard, or Jesus with the beard and the big eyes and the longish hair. I went to a study group many, many years ago when I was in my 20s. And somebody once described God as a diamond. Janet might have heard me say this before. A diamond can be found very rough, it can be very dark, it can be very black, it can be very dusty, it can be polished, and it can be become the most beautiful jewel you've ever seen, throwing off those sparks, just like the glory of God comes off the spark of an image, which is another reason why I've got something glittery in the middle of my white stole with God's glory coming from it, that central power of the diamond. It's not a diamond, it's a stick-on jewel, but it's that power sometimes that you can see sometimes, but sometimes you can't. And I guess my simple faith tells me when I can't see the power of that diamond or the power of God in the moon, because the moon's not there, I like to think that it's shining on somebody else, helping somebody else to get through life, to push them on their journey, showing them the power of the rays of the moon and of the sun for that matter. So I think it's very important that we have everyday objects to look onto, and that they're not religious icons or people that expect clergy to think nothing but, and I know people who do think this, that you think holy thoughts all the time, that we're holier than thou, if you like. And I think it's important to have these everyday things so that we can talk about it like we're talking about it now, because they mean so much to us. But it can help those who are perhaps not as deep in faith yet, but are just learning to be faithful, to find their own object of faith. And I think if they can hear somebody talk about everyday objects, then that helps them in some way, I think.
Thank you, Judith. So we're coming towards the end of our first session. So as we move forward, can I invite anyone that's joining us for the Zoom session to ponder and think about what kind of picture might help you start to talk about your own faith. Think about the sort of person that you really are, remembering your unique story, your distinctiveness, and also the aspect of God's character that you find most significant and inspiring. And think about your relationship with God. And ponder all that, and then when we're in the Zoom session, we'll begin to talk about it. And if you haven't thought of a faith picture, don't worry. It really doesn't matter. It might come to you tomorrow or next week. So the code for the Zoom meeting. The ID is 843 4882 3223. I hope you've all got a pen. ID 843 4882 3223. And the passcode is 025728. 025728. Rightio. Thank you, Kevin. I think you can close this session now, and we'll meet after coffee, probably about, I think we'd better say 8 o'clock, because we've run over a little bit. But anyway, as soon as you've made a brew, join us. See you later.